What do you think about Elon buying Twitter? What do you like? What are you hopeful on that front? What would you like to see Twitter improve?
So I'm very hopeful about Elon buying Twitter. I mean, I think that Elon is significantly more transparent than what has taken place up till now. He seems committed to the idea that he's going to broaden the Overton window to allow for conversations that simply were banned before, everything ranging from efficacy of masks with regard to COVID to whether men can become women and all the rest. A lot of things that would get you banned on Twitter before without any sort of real explanation. It seems like he's dedicated to at least explaining what the standards are going to be and being broader in allowing a variety of perspectives on the outlet, which I think is wonderful. I think that's also why people are freaking out. I think the kind of wailing and gnashing of teeth and wearing of sackcloth and ash by so many members of the legacy media, I think a lot of that is because Twitter essentially was an oligarchy in which certain perspectives were allowed and certain perspectives just were not. And that was part of a broader social media reimposed oligarchy in the aftermath of 2017. So in order to really understand, I think, what it means for Elon to take over Twitter, I think that we have to take a look at sort of the history of media in the United States in 2 minutes or less. The United States, the media, for most of its existence up until about 1990, at least from about 1930s until the 1990s, virtually all media was 3 major television networks, a couple major newspapers, and the wire services. Everybody had a local newspaper with the wire services that basically did all the foreign policy and all the national policy. McClatchy, Reuters, AP, AFP, et cetera. So that monopoly or oligopoly existed until the rise of the internet. There were sort of pokes at it and talk radio and Fox News, but there certainly was not this plethora of sources. Then the internet explodes, and all of a sudden you can get news everywhere. And the way that people are accessing that news is, you're, I believe, significantly younger than I am, but we used to do this thing called bookmarking, where you would bookmark a series of websites and then you would visit them every morning. And then social media came up.
And this on AOL or?
Yeah, exactly. You had the dial up, and it was actually a can connected to a string, and you would actually it would go, and then there came a point where social media arose, and social media was sort of a boon for everybody because you no longer had to bookmark anything. You just followed your favorite accounts, and all of them would pop up, and you followed everything on Facebook, and it would all pop up, and it was all centralized. And for a while, everybody was super happy because this was the brand new wave of the future. It made everything super easy. Suddenly, outlets like mine were able to see new eyeballs because it was all centralized in one place, right? You didn't have to do it through Google optimization. You could now just put it on Facebook, and so many eyeballs were on Facebook, you'd get more traffic. And everybody seemed pretty happy with this arrangement until precisely the moment Donald Trump became president. At that point, then the sort of pre-existing supposition of a lot of the powers that be, which was Democrats are going to continue winning from here on out, so we can sort of use these social media platforms as ways to push our information and still allow for there to be other information out there. The immediate response was, we need to reestablish this siphoning of information. It was misinformation and disinformation that won Donald Trump the election. We need to pressure the social media companies to start cracking down on misinformation and disinformation. And actually see this in the historical record. I mean, you can see how Jack Dorsey's talk about free speech shifted from about 2015 to about 2018. You can see Mark Zuckerberg gave a speech at Georgetown in 2018 in which he talked about free speech and its value. And by 2019, he was going in front of Congress talking about how he was responsible for the stuff that was on Facebook, which is not true. He's not responsible for the stuff on Facebook, right? It's a platform. Is AT&T responsible for the stuff you say on your phone? The answer is typically no. So when that happened, all of these, because all the eyeballs had now been centralized in these social media sites, they were able to suddenly control what you could see and what you could not see. And the most obvious example was obviously leading up to 2020, the election, the killing of the Hunter Biden story is a great example of this. And so Elon coming in and taking over one of the social media services and saying, I'm not playing by your rules, right? There's not going to be this sort of group of people in the halls of power who are going to decide what we can see and hear. Instead, I'm going to let 1,000 flowers bloom. There'll be limits, but it's going to be on a more case-by-case basis. We're going to allow perspectives that are mainstream, but maybe not mainstream in the halls of academia or in the halls of media. Let those be said. I think it's a really good thing. Now, that comes with, some responsibilities on Elon's personal part, which would be, to be, for example, I think more responsible in dissemination of information himself sometimes, right? Like he got himself in trouble the other day for tweeting out that story about Paul Pelosi that was speculative and untrue. And I don't think what he did is, horrific. He deleted it when he found out that it was false. But, and that's actually free speech working, right? He said something wrong. People ripped into him. He realized he was wrong and he deleted it, which seems to me a better solution than preemptively banning content, which only raises more questions than it actually stops. With that said, as the face of responsible free speech, and that's sort of what he's pitching at Twitter, he, I think, should enact that himself and be a little more careful in the stuff that he tweets out.
Well, that's a tricky balance. The reason a lot of people are freaking out is because, one, he's putting his thumb on the scale by saying he is more likely to vote Republican. He's showing himself to be center-right and sort of just having a political opinion versus being this amorphous thing that doesn't have a political opinion. I think if I were to guess, I haven't talked to him about it, but if I were to guess, he's sending a kind of signal that's important for the Twitter, the company itself, because if we're being honest, most of the employees are left-leaning. So you have to kind of send a signal that, like a resisting mechanism to say, like, since most of the employees are left, it's good for Elon to be more right, to balance out the way the actual engineering is done, to say we're not going to do any kind of activism inside the engineering. If I were to guess, that's kind of the effective aspect of that mechanism. And the other one, by posting the Pelosi thing, is probably to expand the Overton window, like saying we can play. We could post stuff, we could post conspiracy theories, and then through discourse figure out what is and isn't true.
Yeah, again, like I say, I mean, I think that that is a better mechanism in action than what it was before. I just think it gave people who hate his guts the opening to kind of slap him for no reason. But I can see the strategy of it for sure. And I think that the general idea that he's, kind of pushing right where the company had pushed left before, I think that there is actually unilateral polarization right now in politics, at least with regard to social media, in which one side basically says the solution to disinformation is to shut down free speech from the other side. And the other side is basically, like, people like me are saying the solution to disinformation is to let 1,000, like, I'd rather have people on the left also being able to put out stuff that I disagree with than for there to be anybody who's sort of in charge of these social media platforms and using them as editorial sites. I mean, they're plenty. I'm not criticizing MSNBC for not putting on right-wing opinions. I mean, that's fine. I run a conservative site. We're not going to put up left-wing opinions on a wide variety of issues because we are a conservative site. But if you pitch yourself as a platform, that's a different thing. If you pitch yourself as the town square, as Elon likes to call it, then I think Elon has a better idea of that than many of the former employees did, especially now that we have that report from The Intercept suggesting that there are people from Twitter working with DHS to monitor quote-unquote disinformation and being rather vague about what disinformation meant.
Yeah, I don't think activism has a place in what is fundamentally an engineering company that's building a platform. Like, the people inside the company should not be putting a thumb on the scale of what is and isn't allowed. You should create a mechanism for the people to decide what is and isn't allowed. Do you think Trump should have been removed from Twitter? Should his account be restored?
His account should be restored. And this is coming from somebody who really dislikes an enormous number of Donald Trump's tweets. Again, he's a very important political personage. Even if he weren't, I don't think that he should be banned from Twitter or Facebook in coordinated fashion. By the way, I hold that opinion about people who I think are far worse than Donald Trump. Right? Everyone knows I'm not an Alex Jones guy. I don't like Alex Jones. I think Alex Jones pervades.
I think Alex should be back on Twitter?
I do, actually, because I think that there are plenty of people who are willing to say that what he's saying is wrong. And I'm not a big fan of this idea that because people I disagree with, and people who have personally targeted me, by the way, I mean, Alex Jones has said some things about me personally that I'm not real fond of.
You guys not?
Well, we're not besties. No, it turns out, yeah. All I've said is I don't really enjoy his show. He said some other stuff about the Antichrist and such, but that's a bit of a different thing, I suppose. Even so,
yeah.
I'm just not a big fan of this idea. Like, I've defended people who have really gone after me on a personal level, have targeted me, that the town square is online. Banning people from the town square is unpersoning them. Unless you violated a criminal statute, you should not be unpersoned in American society, as a general rule. That doesn't mean that companies that are not platforms don't have the ability to respond to you. I think Adidas is right to terminate its contract with Kanye, for example, or with Ye. But Twitter ain't Adidas.
So the way your stance on free speech, to the degree it's possible to achieve on a platform like Twitter, is you fight bad speech with more speech, with better speech. And that's, so if Alex Jones and Trump is allowed back on, in the coming months and years leading up to the 2024 election, you think that's going to make for a better world in the long term?
I think that on the principle that people should be allowed to do this, and the alternative being a group of thought bosses telling us what we can and cannot see, yes. So I think in the short term, it's going to mean a lot of things that I don't like very much. Sure. I mean, them's the cost of doing business, you know? Like, I think that one of the costs of freedom is people doing things that I don't particularly like. And I would prefer the freedom with all the stuff I don't like than not the freedom.